All right, why don't we just jump right in here and get going? This is Robert Phoenix, and this is the Astro Weather for 726. And we are firmly in the sign of Leo, where everything becomes much more personal for people, right? Leo represents pride, and the best example of pride, which is what we've talked about here on the show before, is taking pride in what you do, right? To do it well, to garner some kind of satisfaction for a job well done. You see, because Leo's lesson is the next sign over, right? Leo's lesson is Virgo. Didn't realize that, did you? So Leo has to incorporate Virgo into part of its profile, right? That's how astrology works. Like the next sign over is your lesson. So if you're Virgo, the next sign over is Libra, which means that you can't be particular and fussy and want it your way all the time, because it somehow matches up with some model of perfection or order. Yeah, there's another person in the mix, right? So the lesson here is reasonable compromise. Reasonable compromise, not all the time. Standards sometimes are important. And if you're a Libra, what's the next lesson over? It's Scorpio. So you got to get out of your head, right? You got to get out of your head and stop processing and really get into the psychic basement of things, whether it's sexuality or the deep nature of relating with one another, right? So you can always find the next sign. The next sign over is your lesson. If you didn't know that, that's a little tip there for you today. Let's get into the Astro Weather. And I believe I got the day right, if I am not mistaken, because it is July 26, 2023. So let's get into it. Let's see what yesterday was a crazy day. Crazy day. We're going to get into it. We got the LeBron. It's interesting, right? Is even from a collective perspective, the big news at the end of yesterday's show was not this show, but 15 Minutes Flame, was Bronny James with myocarditis, right? That is a very Leo kind of deal, dealing with the heart. And to date, he might be the most high profile athlete that has succumbed to it at the age of 18. And so it's a very Leo thing, right? And it's focusing on attention on sports. It's focusing attention on a very uncomfortable subject. So it is in the spotlight, right? It's in the spotlight. And it's going to be interesting to see how mainstream media deals with this concept that teens are suffering from myocarditis. I'm going to get into more of that. I think they're going to blame it on the weather. I think they're going to blame it on the sun. And I think they're going to try to use every crisis they can to advance an agenda. And that goes into Bill Gates and dimming and all the stuff that goes along with it. But that's for the 9/11 show. So let's see where we are today. I'm going to zoom in here so we get a better look. Okay. By the way, I hope everybody's having a more than reasonable day. Although I think the energies today are pretty intense. Let's start off with the Sun-Moon square right here. Let's get into that a little bit. That Sun-Moon square early in the day. By the time we move further into the evening, that it'll dissipate, right? But then as we go through tonight and tomorrow, that Scorpio moon is going to start to square Mercury and Venus, and that's when things get problematic. It's a day that's kind of fraught with tension, right? And with the Scorpio moon, your people's motives are being uncovered. If you have any questions about another person's motivations in your life, the Scorpio moon squaring the sun will reveal them. It's a hard angle of light being beamed into sort of the darker corners of our emotional recesses. And the moon in Scorpio it's an incredibly powerful moon, but it's not an easy one because of everything that goes along with it, right? Like, so if we see somebody that has a moon Pluto conjunction in their chart, I guarantee you they possess a quality of obsession, right? Obsession is the psychic underground of Scorpio. And it's not always bad. And I try to tell people that obsession is not always bad. If you are obsessed with learning how to play the guitar, you'll get good at it. Or if you're obsessed at, learning how to do something just in general, you will spend an inordinate amount of time doing that thing. So there are healthy obsessions, in my estimation, even though for other people, they may say, well, there's a sacrifice involved, meaning relating to other people or whatever. But by and large, that's the realm of Scorpio. And so we have this square going on with the sun. And so part of that is the revelation of other people's intentions. Like the unconscious sort of gets like regurgitated here, but it's hard. It's a hard regurgitation. That's with the other. Okay. And the other part of this too is just an extreme restlessness because the sun is moving into a tighter square with Jupiter. And what does that represent? It represents wanting to break free from constraints. Jupiter always relates to Sagittarius and travel and expansion. Doesn't matter what sign it's in. And I think that this is one of those periods of time, particularly over the next, let's just go 48 hours, because of the squares with Mercury and Venus. And ultimately that it resolves itself through an intense and alchemical process of dealing with what you don't have. That this is important because the Sun Jupiter square is essentially saying, look, I got to get out of this place, right? I got to break out of this rut. But when you get into Taurus and Scorpio, there's money and resource issue. Now, I'll give you the upside of this T square. Again, this is just early on in the day, right? By the time we move into this evening, this is already at a 7-degree square. By the time we get on into this evening, the process of squaring over here begins. But this is, to quote the animals, we got to get out of this place. If it's the last thing we ever do, right? And because the sun moon square also represents your relationship to kind of where you are, where you live, and it can feel very confining. And then over here is the promise of the breakaway with the Sun Jupiter square. So that's a big part of today, right? And again, these conditions are not mutually exclusive. Like the revelation, and to some extent, you may even see into your own process. You may even see into your own process where you hold on to things. Like sometimes the moon in Scorpio can be really petty, really, really petty. And it can set up patterns of jealousy and envy, right? That's another potential way to look at this T square. And then the square with Jupiter challenges you in some way to take a higher perspective. It's a really interesting start of the day, right? And from this position, from the moon to Jupiter, it's like you just want to take the elevator right out of here. Let me get out of here. And then the sun comes and says, well, you really can't do that. You have things to do here. You have responsibilities. You have kids. Remember that song back in the, what was it, the early 2000s about the parents that leave their kids behind? What was the name of that song? It was kind of a haunting song. It was a huge hit, one-hit wonder band. Yeah, so there's that going on. And then later tonight, and going into tomorrow, that moon is going to start to square Mercury, Venus, and those are challenging, right? Like your challenge, the moon at that point becomes something where you begin to really look at like how you process all this with other people. And I think there's and this is where I urge you a little bit of caution here, just a little bit of caution, that if you're on the friend hotline tonight, and you're either on the receiving call or the sending call, and you're trying to work something out and process, I would say be very judicious about what you share, because that moon square with Mercury and Venus can and will be used against you in a court of law in a future time. No, I'm just kidding a little bit, but there is a little bit of that, right? It's kind of like something gets said and somebody never forgets it. They never forget it. That is the potential for this T-square. Again, we're talking later tonight and tomorrow. So I would say use your words carefully, definitely carefully, right? Now, when, 2 days from now, when that moon moves into Sagittarius, we're in a very different conversation, and things lighten up tremendously, right? So I wouldn't say this is dark night of the soul period, but it does have a bit of that flavor to it. Now, Mars is sextile the moon here. Of course, we have Mars in the always detail oriented sign of Virgo, right? So if you wanted to work through the swamp and deal with, feeling like you're trapped, you want to get out, you don't have enough resources, all that stuff, just put your head down and work. Just put your head down and work. Today is a good day for that. You can lose yourself in the flow, the deep flow of the details. Right? Today is one of those days where if you get caught up here and not really wanting to be where you are, and also through the same process, becoming more aware of the deeper motivations and darker motivations around other people and even inside yourself. I mean, this is one of those days where you could say, fuck, that was manipulative. What I just engaged in was manipulative. Man, I gotta work on that. I mean, there is some of that. Again, it could also be true for the other. So this is where we are today. We're kind of excavating these shadowy emotional processes. That said, if you get too hung up on that, just get to work. Because if you can get into a rhythm and a pattern with the details of your work, you will find yourself almost breaking through and getting into a workflow. That is really important. Breaking through and getting into a workflow. So if you can do that, you can circumnavigate this dynamic tension of shit, I just really don't want to be here. I mean, that's a big part of this. And wait 2 days. That brings us up around the weekend, right? And then we have that moon in Sagittarius coming into the weekend energy. And I think this weekend is an absolutely fantastic time to play. It is a fantastic time to play. So if you want to really get away, do something fun, have a barbecue, use the next 2 days to get your shit done. Right? Like Mars is there right now. Like get it done. Get it done. Get it done. It's the best therapy right now. That is the best therapy, is really roll up your sleeves, get to work. Tonight, again, just be very aware of conversations. If it is tonight, for some of you, it might be early tomorrow. Just be aware of conversations where there's an urgency. We have an urgency to share and like kind of regurgitate what's going on in your life. I would say being a listener is better than being an oversharer. So take that for what it's worth. Mars is coming in here and trining Jupiter. So, man, there's a lot of opportunity if you, again, the idea is that if you, this is the American dream, right? This is capitalism. This is Mars and Virgo. You roll up your sleeves and you work your ass off, and then with Jupiter and Taurus, opportunity presents itself. This is theoretically how it's supposed to work, right? In another timeline. But I do think that there is a there, and you may even be close to overworking. But you know what else? If you're doing something for a living, what else? What other options do you have? I mean, we talked about last week the Mars Saturn opposition, where it was like, I deserve better, or I deserve more, or usually that's some respect or pay, right? We talked about that. And so Mars is moving on. And so if you did your due diligence, right, and you said in a very Virgo kind of way, take this job and shove it, the Mars Jupiter trine helps you out. It's like, oh, well, look, I was right. I am worth more, right? So there's that. We still have the odd going on with Neptune and Pluto, and now Mercury has moved into the odd space. Now, this is really interesting, this aspect. I think it's revelatory. It's a revelatory aspect around relationships and the nature of relationships and the dynamics around partnering. And as on an individual level, you might even have some insight into your own creative potential, because I think a lot of us are really, I would say struggling, but we're challenged to not just put food on the table and pay a mortgage or make a car payment, but to also do something that is close to our hearts, right? So remember, Leo represents hobbies and pastimes. So if you're not getting everything out of your work, and not everybody can, then this is actually a really good time to look at, with this yod, how to become more creative in your life, like to tap into creativity as an artistic process. And with Venus there conjunct Mercury, it's always a good plan to have somebody help you. I remember a long time ago, I took this watercolor class when I was living on the coast in California, and we had to do like a painting, right? Like a watercolor painting, just as like a test. And the teacher put this picture up, and I sucked. I really sucked. And I felt like, man, this looks like I'm 10 years old doing this thing. At the time I was around 24. But then the teacher came in and she showed me some techniques. And I'm like, wow, okay. And then the next one I did was like completely different. It was like, wow, just in those few little tips and hints, I was able to actually look at something and, wow, that's not too bad, right? That's Venus here. So if you need some help, get some help. If you need some instruction, get some instruction. So this is a really good day with this yod. If you're feeling incomplete in your life, right? If your work is not cutting it, but you got to do it anyway, look into the hobby space, look into something that is creative, because these are the titans of the cosmos, right? And they're back here in the back end trying to get your attention. For all you parents out there, interesting times of conversations with your kids. And if you have kids that follow sports and are concerned about Bronny James, this is definitely discussion time. Let's see what else. We got a sun trine to Neptune, but it's sort of fading a little bit. We've been dealing with that sun Neptune trine since around 20 Cancer, and the compassion and the empathy that goes along with that is still there, but it's not as like, here, let me make you soup, as it was in the sun in Cancer. All in all, I think it's an interesting day. Even that Moon Saturn trine, to me, that goes right in alignment with the Moon Mars sextile, which is, you get lost in the emotional weeds, put your head down, roll up your sleeves, get to work, find a flow, and you'll ground your emotions a lot better and a lot easier. Okay, let's get into the start of the day. Today is one of those days where there are a lot of candidates. We have, Stanley Kubrick is born today. Stanley Kubrick. Mick Jagger is born today. And I've done Jagger's chart before. It's a very interesting chart. Aldous Huxley is born today. Now, Aldous Huxley will move to tomorrow's star of the day. Because if you're born on the 27th of August, that is a day bereft of anybody like that I found that would be remotely interesting. And I'm sure if you're born on August 27th, there's a very good chance you might be more interesting than people that are well known. Like I was kind of down to Peggy Fleming for August 27th, and people are going to scratch their heads. Who the fuck is Peggy Fleming? Anyway, so Aldous Huxley gets run tomorrow because he's interesting, right? And he's shaped the 20th century in more ways than people understand or know. But today's star of the day is none other than, drumroll please, Carl Jung. There he is. Carl Jung, who really shaped psychology, mythology, art in a way that perhaps very few people have done in the 20th century. Carl Jung, there's a reason why he's on Sergeant Pepper, right? They have all those figures on Sergeant Pepper, and Carl Jung is on Sergeant Pepper. Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So Jung he's a trip, no doubt about it, right? Like this guy takes Freud's work and just literally sends it into the stratosphere. What's interesting about Jung is that first and foremost, what is he? He's a therapist, and he has Sun in the 7th house. And I've always maintained that if you have Sun in the 7th house and even Sun in the 8th house, but if you have Sun in the 7th house, one of the things you're good at is counseling, that you can work one-on-one with other people, right? One-on-one with other people. And that's what Jung did. A lot of people just thought that he was a guy that made these alchemical drawings and wrote books. No, he was a practicing analytical. He was actually a psychiatrist, right? Back in the day, that it was called, even though I don't think it was Dr. Jung, right? I think the titles came later. But that's his gig, man, right? That's his meat and potatoes. It's over here. And he's loaded every single asteroid in the zodiac, right? It is right here in his 7th house. And what's interesting is that behind him is Vesta. And Vesta is the oldest of the asteroids, right? And so it's almost like illuminating the past for Jung. And Jung has no problem going into the depths of the past. Not only that, but he has Pallas conjunct his Sun, which is patterns, right? Patterns. So in the client space, he could easily go into a person's history with Vesta here and what's gone on with them. And with Pallas, he could easily assess the patterns in their life. And then with Juno, what do we have? We have potentially a new and fresh perspective since it is conjunct Uranus, which is going to be new and unique and fresh, right? And then over here, completing the entire cycle is Vesta, which is nurturing the new. Very interesting seventh house. The other thing with Jung is that he made his most profound discovery with a client, and it was the discovery of synchronicity. And that to me is Uranus. Uranus rules synchronicities, things that just happen out of nowhere, and they're related, but related in ways that are really novel and unusual. So the story behind Jung is that he had a patient, and the patient was recounting a dream to Jung about a beetle. And Jung was walking around the office listening to the patient talk about their dream with the beetle. And in that moment, a very unusual beetle, a scarab, which is normally found in Egypt. All right, keep this in mind. He's in Switzerland. He's not doing therapy in Cairo. A scarab actually flew up to the window of his office. And so here we have the first case of synchronicity. Here we have Jung talking to his patient over here, seventh house, about the dream around the beetle. And then the beetle appears. Now, you may think that it's just a mere coincidence, but the type of beetle, which was very rarely, if ever, seen in Switzerland, showed up. That's one of the reasons why Jung is on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, because the name of their group is the Beatles, right? So now we're doing kind of more syncs here with Jung. The other thing with Jung, with Uranus in the seventh house, is he's going to have unusual relationships. And you can see this in his chart as well. You know, like he had his wife, who was very dowdy. You know, she was the perfect manage the household wife. And then he had a lover. Jung had a lover. Jung committed the most egregious sin that a therapist could partake in. And Jung's lover was Tony Wolff. And Tony Wolff was Jung's muse. And I think his wife knew about the affair, right? She knew that Tony Wolff was going to give Jung a peek into the anima, right? Because the anima and the animus are also two concepts that really spring up out of Jung. And so for Jung, he has these two women in his life. And you can see the unusual nature of relationship with Uranus here, but also with Jupiter in the eighth house, right? That's like, again, hidden. It's all hidden. And Jupiter's in Sag. And we have this square with Venus, Mercury. Jung is very insightful. I mean, we know that. But with the Venus, Mercury conjunction in Cancer, he was deeply insightful. And Jung, I'm sure, had a steel trap memory. And I think that people that have Venus, Mercury conjunctions in their chart, particularly in Cancer, have the ability to travel into the past, right? Cancer is always about the past. So I think people that have that, Mercury is mean to travel. So it's a relationship with the past and the ability to travel through the past, and here in the sixth house to find practical uses for it. But again, Jupiter squaring Venus, right? Like, also, this is his work. And if you, there are people who are in the therapy space as practitioners, that meet higher level people, in spite of everything that Jung did as a therapist and somebody who understands the power of myth and the collective unconscious and archetypes, they can't wrap their arms around them. For Tony Wolff, right? And Tony Wolff is that kind of driving force in Libra in the eighth house. And you can see that Jung, with his true note in Aries, is kind of going to do what he wants to do, right? He's going to do what he wants to do. And the second house is all about values. So I think he had some very strict values, except when it came to that part of him, right? He's an Aquarius rising, so he's different. And Aquarius rising people have high strange happen to them. And again, the ruler of Aquarius is Uranus. And so what are we dealing with? We're dealing with synchronicity here, right? Synchronicity. And he is going to break from Freud. And we can see the attachment to Freud, third house, Moon, Pluto, and like a brother in psychiatry. But he breaks with Freud because Freud won't share his dreams. He's like, fuck you. Who are you? Freud, if you're all that, you're going to share your dreams. And Freud did not want to do that. He did not want to do that. He's like, you're not getting into my dreams, buddy boy. So, and the other thing with Jung too, is he was very creative. I mean, clearly he's a Leo, but he's got that Mars trine. It's the Y trine, but he's got that kind of Mars trine with Chiron and then Neptune. And there's these images of Jung playing in the sandbox. I mean, literally sandbox therapy comes out of Jung. And that's what he did. He spent time in sandboxes on beaches. He wanted to connect with that part of himself where there was creative potential. And then, of course, if you see the big red book, which is his alchemical tome, right? You can see it here. You can see it with Mars and Mars trying to Chiron. Jung was a force, man. He was definitely a force. He had that Mars Uranus trine in his chart, like really interesting. The 11th house, I don't think he was. I think if you were Jung's friend, it was hard to be his friend. I think he would have been merciless as a friend, right? I think he would have been encouraging, but also quite merciless as a friend. His midheaven is at 29 Scorpio. So it's that anaretic degree. And I always felt like Tony Wolff was his Black Moon Lilith, right? Like right here, conjunct his midheaven. And in Sagittarius, it's this kind of mediator between orthodoxy and what's going on beneath the surface of Jung's life. And I wonder, because this is the shadow, right? This is the whole idea of the shadow comes out of Jung. And Black Moon Lilith is the shadow. And I think he probably went through a lot of very deep processing around his relationship with her in general. Very interesting guy. His mother played a huge role in his life. There's a very interesting book. If you want to get into the dark side of Carl Jung a little bit, there's a book called Aryan Christ, and it talks about Jung's relationship with his mother, who is a spiritualist and a Swedenborgian, right? So Manuel Swedenborg also plays a role in Carl Jung's life. And it talks about all of those influences that were in his life from a very, very young age. It's a very interesting book. It kind of blows the top off of Jung worship a bit, because it shows the human side of Carl Jung. And, not that how do I phrase this? There are hints in the book that Jung was, I wouldn't say he was a eugenicist. Clearly, there's nothing in the work that suggests that. But it's the pantheon of influences from Wagner to Nietzsche. We'll throw Swedenborg in. There is a certain kind of racial zeitgeist, right, that is part of the development of Carl Jung. So it's a very interesting book. Jung's an interesting character, and he's got that T-square with Saturn and the sun and moon Pluto. Look, as much as he was probably rigorous and very, I would say, meticulous with his clients, I think he had the same relationship with himself, right? This is a guy, I think the Tony Wolf thing was big, but this was a guy who left no stone unturned. Remember I was talking about that Moon Pluto conjunction earlier, like the Moon in Scorpio? He had it, but it's very, very wide. It's sitting out here, like they're together, but they're not, on top of one another. So Jung would also get obsessed. He would get obsessed with certain things. And here in the third house, it has a lot to do with ideas. And the women in his life play a very particular role, right? He's either the other person here we got to talk about is Marie-Louise von Franz. That's the third of the kind of Jungian triad of women in his life. And she plays a huge role in his life. You can see that with Mercury, Venus here. She was, kept all of his records and his notes, and she went on to become a gifted therapist in her own right. Very interesting chart. I could do a really big deep dive on this in a written article. So anyway, there's your star of the day, Carl Jung. And I hope some of this made sense to you and that you could see that the chart is definitely a reflection of the man and vice versa. All right, we're out of here. Please join us on 15 Minutes of Flame. That'll be over on 15 Minutes of Flame. And we're going to get into Bronny and Obama and a lot of other stuff that's going on right now. There it is, 15minutesofflame.com. If you're interested in reading, you can get that over at robertphoenix.com. And what else? Oh, True Hemp Science, truehempscience.com. That is your one-stop shop for all things CBD plus. We traveled and we've been in other states, and we've stopped in at the dispensary every now and then to have the experience with the odd gummy every now and then in a very relaxed setting. And I have to say, the Moon Dust gummies, they rival those gummies. And in some ways, I think they're better. And I'll tell you why. It's kind of like you're catching an updraft, like a thermal. That's what they're like. And you don't get the kind of the heavy, stony, sedated feeling from them. You're alert. You're kind of, it's a really interesting addition to one's daily use of pharmacopoeia. Besides the Moon Dust gummies, there's also sleep gummies, and my mother loves the sleep gummies. And they work with her. It's hard for her to get to sleep, hard to sleep through the night, and they are her nightly communion, right? I mean, that's how good they are. And there's a whole host of other products there. So truehempscience.com, get $100 of products or more, and just type in 15MINS, and you will get free goodies, and you will not be dissatisfied. But if you are, there's always a 30-day money-back guarantee. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for being here. It's Robert Phoenix with your Astro Weather, and take good care. A wonderful day. If you're in another part of the world, I hope your evening and your sleep takes you places that you learn from and love from. All right, that's it. Take good care. Bye for now.